complicity issues. So I just wanted to open up the floor and see if any of you off the bat have any questions, statements, thoughts, ideas, things you want to pose to the room, to the speakers, to God, to not God, to the void.
I just felt like saying like we need more data. It's like we're sitting here. I just like want us to like dance. No, I mean, I was just like a prompt to say like we need more data, like more movement, more something. It just like it feels like, we are also institutionalizing the conversation and the issue by maybe speaking in this kind of way, which is necessary, but.
Yeah, if you want to get up and perform here, I'm so serious. Anybody wants to use this as a performance forum, I would love that. No, he's just like, no. No, I get it. I feel you. I get it. Are there any questions to start off? No? Anybody? Don't be shy. Okay. Well, I'll start. Oh, yes, we have a question. Amazing. Thank you.
Hi, sorry, I really liked what everyone had to say, but isn't complicity basically accepting that everything that you've said or, described about the art world is just a fact that can't be changed? That's one question. I really like that you said that it's unethical for artists to just create in a self-referential circle, just talking about the art world, because there is so much going on. I think of artists as kind of how you take the temperature of every culture. And regardless of what their subject matter is, they're speaking from an individualized perspective of their experience. But even in getting really personal, like there's always like a thread of universality, which is often what I look for when I go look at art and think about what powerful art is. It doesn't have to be overtly political, but I don't know, I guess if we're all just like making jokes about like, haha, okay, you guys are all white guys sitting up there, like why, like do we have to accept that, okay, yeah, the economy shit, the politics of the US right now, or aren't the artists the ones who change the rules and shake things up? And I don't know, that was a lot of stuff, but if you would talk on any of those topics, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, guys, I think it's time to do a dance. Come on.
I'm the one diversion tactic.
Come on, it's important. No? We're going to do a dance, right? Yeah, come on.
Let's see it. Okay. Okay, let's go.
It has to happen.
Okay, what are we dancing to? Okay.
I don't know.
I feel like this is like a really mean diversion tactic.
A complicity, the complicity dance. 2017 complicity dance. Come on.
Raise your arms and then just like.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Easter. I was thinking Easter up here. Complicity. Complicity. 2017. We're so repressed. We're so repressed. But we want to make art. We don't want to be. Come on, guys.
Yeah, I know. Keep going.
Come on, guys.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say I'm the only non-artist up here, so there's your answer.
I have a feeling you're a very good dancer.
Later, yeah.
Okay.
We gotta turn these fluorescents off.
I think that
Can you hear this?
your question ascribes a lot of power to artists. No, when you're saying aren't artists the people in the world who are supposed to shake things up and who are, I mean, that would be great if it was true, but let's face it, it's not. So I'm trying to get at the crux of what you're.
But isn't that being complicit with the status quo? Like, sorry, isn't that being complicit with the status quo? Complicit. You were talking about it being attached to something negative, or I forget. You went into the definition of.
Oh, I see. I mean, I think that the thing that you were reading from Mariam Ghani's piece about artists being the thin end of the wedge, I think that's very accurate. but, you know, in terms of artists changing the world, I mean, I think I'm reminded of, I think it was in a lecture that Coco Fusco was giving, actually, where she was saying, you know, when people ask the extent to which quote-unquote political artists can affect real political change in a measurable way, she says, isn't that a really hubristic way of thinking? This idea that you alone are going to change the world through your artists. I mean,
Not
you are
alone.
part of a broader coalition of people working. So, sorry, I'm just maybe I'm picking up on only the second part of your question about shouldn't artists be the ones changing the world.
Not shouldn't.
And missing the first
Not
part.
shouldn't.
but-
That they're part of what does make the average person think, right? Because
Right.
it's like it takes things into another language. And
Yeah.
when you talk about Coco Fusco, didn't she do the piece where she had the Israelis and the Palestinian teenagers dancing in a room?
Doesn't
I
sound,
don't know that
Arthur
piece.
Chmielewski, I think.
Anyway, it was
Yeah.
just about like bringing just like pointing out the universality of humanity.
But I'm so sorry if I'm being slow, but I'm trying to understand. So your question is, aren't we all being complicit by posing these questions?
Oh,
or-
no. It's not a criticism per se. I'm just
That's
saying,
okay.
like, couldn't we think that, like, just by accepting that this is the way the world is, or this is the way the art world is, that we're somehow agreeing to just let it stay that way? Aren't we all empowered to change it? Isn't that why we're
But
here?
Okay,
Well,
but who
well,
is
there's,
saying-
I mean, there's complicity and there's complacency. And I think I'm part of the question up there, you know, is it conscious, intentional, passive, brings complacency into the picture. I think there are ways that we can be complicit by being complacent, by, say, I think you mentioned like international travel and the sort of like culture of the art world. You know, when you run into people at an opening, say I run into fellow writers and everybody asks like, oh, are you going to Venice? You know, I'm going to see you in Basel and Münster. And it's like, you know, who has money to go to all these places? And then feels the pressure to save up rather than, you know, paying off loan debt or saving up for a house or for, you know, the master's degree that they want, paying to go to an art fair. And that's a kind of like, I mean, I don't know if maybe that's not quite complacency, but it's certainly a passive form of you know, encouraging a certain amount of complicity in this financial system. But I would agree with David that, you know, I don't think that artists are particularly empowered. I don't think writers are particularly empowered either. I would disagree with the suggestion that that artists don't have ethical responsibilities. I think as soon as their work is within a sort of publicly visible context, they have an ethical responsibility to, well, that's a little bit more complicated. I need to think about that one for a second. But I do think that depending on the context and the issues that they're trying to address, there are certain ethical responsibilities that they have in communicating with the public.
I do not agree. But I don't entirely disagree either. I think, you know, the distinction I would make is, you know, I have an aesthetic responsibility and a certain I do things as an artist, and I also happen to be made of like flesh and blood. I'm a person, and I'm a citizen of the United States, for better or worse. And I definitely have ethical responsibility because of that. I'm also a father and a husband, and all those sorts of things that bring in ethical questions constantly. How to navigate in the world. Where do I shop? You know, like where do my vegetables come from? How do I travel and make all those kinds of decisions that all of us have to choose about? And I think, but I do think that as the artist part, as much as we assume people are like, you're one person, like I'm an artist and a father, I actually decide that I'm not. Like I split these things into different parts. Now that doesn't mean I don't have to make decisions as the person part of me about how do I run the business side of what I do in making things? How do I purchase materials? What's the right way to do that? What are the ethical decisions involved in that? How do you deal with selling work, and what are the questions about your ethical responsibility? Can you decide who to sell to and who not to? What makes you comfortable and where, and those things? I actually had it wasn't something, we didn't sell it to Ivanka, but I saw like a piece of ours was like in some apartment that she was like trying to sell, and they clearly like an advisor had like let them borrow all the work from. And there's nothing I can do about it because it's not, I don't even know who the advisor was. I just know that they didn't buy it from us. But that raises like a whole question on my responsibility as a participant in capitalism. I have ethical questions I have to deal with. But I think they're different from form, shape, line, color, texture, space, which are art questions.
There's a formalist questions,
Yeah.
which is a very specific interpretation of art.
Yeah, it is.
But
Let's remember that.
Yes, yes.
to your point, Seth, when I was thinking about this topic, I was thinking about an ethical question I had come into, which is that I had a collector who was commissioning a piece for me, and it was right around the time of the election, and we were meeting, blah, 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 and then it came up that she and her husband had voted for Donald Trump, and that they were big Donald Trump fans, and I was deeply incensed in that moment and felt like, well, I don't really know if I want to sell you my art. Like, even though I really need the money, like I have to pay my rent, and I was counting on this money before I knew that you voted for Donald Trump. So like, I have all these things I now need to pay off, bills, credit card bills. And I was in a really kind of personally, ethically sticky situation because and the piece, whatever, I don't want to get too into it, but the piece she wanted me to make was about the fact that it was about immigrants and that her grandparents had come to America as immigrants, and I just thought it was like so absurd that, yeah, that's God. That's the absurd God coming, making sure he knows he's here. I'm just kidding. I don't believe in God. But anyways, but it raised this question because I was talking about it with some people I love and care about and getting their input, and somebody brought up like, well, how about, in Kansas or wherever it was, Kentucky, the cake maker who doesn't want to make a cake for a gay wedding, right? Like, they don't believe in that ethically. That's not a part. I mean, I don't mean to make this too basic, but I think, I'm a part of Dear Ivanka, and the whole Dear Ivanka group came out of talking about the fact that Ivanka collects Nate Lohman and Dan Coleman and Alex Katz and blah, blah, blah. And, should collectors be allowed to sell work to her? Should collectors take a stand and say, no, we're not going to sell you this work because we don't agree with you, right? And when you break it down into terms of just sort of pure, right, when you look at other ways that this can play out, right? Like people deciding, I don't believe in gay marriage, so I'm not going to sell you the flowers to your gay wedding, or I don't believe in Judaism because I'm Christian and I think Jews are heathen. So not that there are, maybe, I don't know if those people are so explicitly operating in economic systems, but I think a lot about this question of, in a transaction, an economic financial transaction, where do your ethics come in, right? I mean, we draw the line someplace, like we no longer buy leopard skin pillbox hats.
Speak for yourself.
No, but like we no longer buy endangered species, right? We've drawn the line there. We've said, okay, endangered species, that's not cool. Some people are really anti-fur. Some people become vegans for activism, right? Like there are ways that people play out their beliefs and their ideologies in the way that, what is the movement called? Grab your wallet. Hashtag grab your wallet.
But I think it's dangerous to somehow kind of align a boycott of an organization or a person who engages in unethical labor practices or whatever it is, and discrimination against a group based on race or gender or sexuality. I mean, those are not the same.
But what if you're saying, what if, I totally agree with you, but I'm just sort of posing a devil's advocate question, which is, can you make decisions not to engage with somebody transactionally based on a disagreement in politics, which probably goes further into a sort of basic disagreement of ethics? Right? Can you decide I no longer want to engage, I no longer want to have these transactions, in the same way that,
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, the art world has always reserved the right to refuse service to everyone, and for far less ethically, compelling grounds.
Yes.
I mean, I think there are people who, if they walked into a gallery and they ask, how much is it? Like, the attendant or the assistant is not going to tell them how much it is. They're going to assess how serious they are about buying, and whether they're the kind of client that gallery wants to have before they sell them anything. It's not every gallery, but certainly Chelsea galleries. are a lot more guarded about who they sell to. And so if they are guarded about selling to, you know, oligarchs and Trump supporters, then, you know, all the better, but.
Well,
Technically, they have to print the price list.
the thing about it
Legally,
that's
right?
difficult politically, I
In New
think,
York
is
City.
that, like, what are we really talking about? We're talking only on a case-by-case basis.
Right.
And the art world is a giant black box. People don't have statistics about sales, about primary market. It doesn't exist. You cannot find these statistics. So, I mean, it's
not
the
like-
largest,
yeah.
people say it's the largest unregulated
Unregulated
market in the world.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. And it's vastly growing. And so it's this massive world with no potential for collectivity because you can't even get
Because
the
you
data.
can't
I
even
mean,
get it, yeah.
besides maybe nonprofits and stuff like that where there is some data. But so what works? I mean, if we're talking about complicity, the opposite of complicity is like what? Resistance, right? And the resistance is not like, oh, what resistance against something I don't like because it sort of don't like it that much. It's like resistance is against what a few months ago looked like fascism, and now we're not sure, but it's like definitely people are getting thrown under the bus. So the ethical quandary is not, should I sell to Ivanka's friends or not? Because I don't like them. It's like, oh, people are getting deported, and they're my family, or they're my friends, or I don't want to live in a country where people are getting deported. What do I do about it? And then the issue is like, you can't, there's no such thing as a boycott, because there's no data, and there's no structure to organize it. The only thing that works politically is organizing, and art world is like the worst
yeah,
organizing
the worst
territory.
organizer, yeah.
So I think what we need to do is ask ourselves, and it's been said by many people, why is it such a bad territory for organizing on this basic level, the actual level of politics? The reason is, it's been said, you said something, we're all sort of in competition in a highly professional networked environment where we're sort of like, there's few people who make a lot of money, but really most people don't make very much.
Make sure, yeah.
Even people who sell don't really make that much. So basically, it seems to be that there is open competition. You have to be highly networked to survive, which means that you can afford to take a risk because it's a reputational economy that is a speculative reputational economy, meaning you're speculating on your own cultural capital to make enough to even survive, which is, I'm sure, many people in this room are in that position. So we're essentially networked together, which sounds like it's collective, but it's the exact opposite. Right. We're exactly in competition with each other, which makes it hard to form the trust which is needed for a kind of union effort, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't even see, like, talking about who you're going to sell to or not, we're so far away from that being the reality. Because of course, everybody will go in the back room and sell
To
whatever
whoever
they
they
need
want,
to do
right.
to make it work.
There have been some efforts in New York City to actually bring some form of financial regulation into the art world. They've always not gotten very far. Spitzer was actually working on it when he was Attorney General, and then other things happened, but it's never picked up. Obviously, there's a ton of powerful interests that would not like that to happen, because it's good money. Like if you're in the right spot, like you definitely don't want to regulate this unregulated market. But there's a lot of things that could transform immediately. Like the smallest thing that happens is what I mentioned is that galleries are required in New York City to publish prices. Now some of them will do it on one sheet of paper and hide it in the back room. And then I don't think there's an inspector who goes around, but if you ask anything that's on view, the price has to be published somewhere. That's nothing. Like that's not doing a lot for us. But even like the way that artists are actually, like what are the rules around what representation means? There aren't any rules. We know that across the board, right? Like has anyone ever seen a contract? They exist, but they're all made up as they go along. Every artist and gallery has a different relationship. Some of them are handshakes. Some of them are 20-page contracts. And there's no kind of across-the-board situation coming from the state to actually tell us these are the things that should work and these are the things that shouldn't work. Now there's interest on the part of the state in doing this because it could actually bring tax revenue. A significant amount of tax revenue could come through this if they were actually able to trace the money and follow how it moves around. But also so much of it's not actually, the money's not actually based in New York. It's global money. And that's just going to become more prevalent with the Freeport that's going to open up in Harlem. And I think another one is happening soon. There's going to be a few different free ports in New York, which I think will change. It's just going to be more and more globalized money that we have no idea what it is or how much it's worth.
Right, but there's different ways to look at it, because you can look at it from the side of the collectors, but what about individually the side of the artists? And then that's where work is being done. I think Wage working with museums, but also going towards like a wage agency, which is where Lisa and those people behind Wage are going now. So the idea is like independently artists kind of become a union, a proto-union, and have kind of like ethical, what?
But also like Gulf labor, I mean, extraordinarily effective, pretty much shut the entire Guggenheim down.
That's something else though, because Gulf, right.
Just in terms of organizing, what you're saying about like.
Yeah, that's different though, because the reason it's different is because Gulf Labor is like an NGO.
Mm-hmm.
Gulf Labor is like an effective NGO. In fact, we work with Human Rights Watch and the UN and all this stuff. So we're becoming a group of artists that has good research, sending artists to the UAE to do research, and good direct action and good press contacts. So functioning, and also resources, academic resources. So functioning like a good NGO that's able to challenge an institution like Human Rights Watch would.
As opposed to a trade union, you mean?
Exactly, because
Right.
Gulf Labor is a pretty small group of high cultural capital artists, not me, but like Tanya Bruguera, Wally Rod, and basically is pushing this one issue forward. But what we're talking about here, I think, is kind of a grassroots movement of equity in the arts, and then so then it's like a mechanism for finding a definition for ourselves as artist worker, right? Because it's not coming from the collector class. I mean, we're going, the country is going away from regulation right now, right? It's not
Far
going
away.
towards regulation. So where is the leverage point? And I think the leverage point might be, I think it's artists in debt, because debt going to art school makes no sense right now. Like 7 out of the 10 most expensive art schools in the US of the most expensive schools in the US are art schools. So they're really expensive, they're very low earning potential, and it's like, okay, so you get rich kids going to art school, but nobody, that doesn't look good. So it's like, it's kind of, or you have people in debt. And I think that we're coming to a breaking point with that, and then maybe that breaking point will lead to unionization.
I was going to say, so do you realistically see a kind of unionization movement amongst artists themselves, practitioners, that will actually carry some kind of bargaining power?
Possibly. I mean, I think it's probably going to come from other organizations that are going to try to impose big artist agencies from the outside, so that's probably the bigger threat. But I think that artists could start self-organizing because the tools exist.
I have something to say. When she was like a power of artists, maybe power of artists doesn't only come from the impact. Power of artists doesn't only come from the impact that your produced work creates, but it comes from all the choices that you previously make as a human. So there is a lot of power that's being created by artists going into uninhabitable areas and then raising the price of real estate over 1 or 2 or 3 decades. So,
But those artists, they're often the harbingers of gentrification and are never stakeholders in that real estate.
No, exactly.
That's
but
the system.
Exactly. But now looking back and making an assessment of the fact that in last 3 decades, certain number of artists brought up value in Soho or
Chelsea.
here or there, a certain number of dollars. You can say like, hey, listen, my power doesn't come only from my produced work and what issues I tackled by this work, but also by my life's choices to live without heat, squat with 55 other people. And that's maybe my also unionizing power, because now people going to Detroit and, over a couple of decades.
Baltimore, Detroit, yeah.
Over a couple of decades, like a termites working hard, not to destroy but to create. They will bring up the value, and somebody else is going to skim it. But if there is maybe some way to kind of skim, skim some value and power, bargaining power from just like life's choices. I don't know. I mean, because maybe we have more power than just as artists.
So you're saying that the political power of artists rests not in the content of their work, but in their role at the vanguard of the gentrification process?
Yes,
in terms
one
of
of
real
those.
estate.
Yes, because I think that would be interesting angle and light to shed on our life and our value, because we are also, I think we are maybe limiting ourselves just by observing our value through this perceived value of our art that somebody else has to give through us becoming part of the system and being accepted into venues of power. But what about our power before that?
I think it's a really
It's a
interesting
really-
point. I mean, it's happening right now a lot in upstate New York, I'm understanding, also in Philadelphia and around like 10, because people are massively getting displaced from Brooklyn now, right? It's like
Yeah.
impossible. So I've been looking, there's a city called Newburgh upstate. It's like one of the most, it was the murder capital of New York State a few years ago because they sort of, the state like massively displaced a lot of social problems and halfway houses onto the city of Newburgh in like the 70s and stuff. And basically, so there's a lot of poverty, just straight up poverty there. And now there's a huge influx of artists because there's big industrial buildings that are very cheap. The problem with that though is that it's like you just can't see besides this super like hardcore racialized gentrification, right? It's like you see people with some privilege and wealth coming to a place like Newburgh and build, like you're saying, building it up in a way, but also displacing, right? And I just saw like a shocking picture from Newburgh of open studios. And okay, we're making a picture here too, but like 100% white artists, like in a city that I think is 75% non-white. And it was just, it's like real, that's in a way the edge of gentrification. So it's hard to get beyond that.
Yeah, and
The other hand, there is, I think that, I wonder if we are even privileged to understand the conversation around art that's happening in not LA, not New York, not Berlin right now, right? Because in these communities, there must be something happening out of the shadow, in the shadow, that is like a different definition of art and a different definition of artistic like agency, right? And it's not only how we project onto it as racialized gentrification. I think that's an interesting question, is to understand more about that.
I'm from Los Angeles, and the debate over gentrification right now in Boyle Heights makes debates over gentrification here look pretty tame, I have to say. Things have gotten really, really heated in the last year there, and I think part of that hinges on the way that institutions have embedded themselves within the community. I think, and this is, given that you work for Martha Rosler and are familiar with, surely with culture class, I think about Martha Rosler's book, or long essay, multi-part essay, The Culture Class, quite often, which is a really brilliant read. But I think touches on the fact that we can only demand that artists have the personal responsibility to try and become a part of their community when they go where they can afford to live and have studio space, I moved to a Central American neighborhood when I moved to New York, just east of Bushwick, and that was where I could afford to live. And I felt like a gentrifier being there, but I didn't know what to do with it other than to try and meet my neighbors and try and integrate myself as much as possible before I ended up moving. And I have friends who live on the east side of Los Angeles who feel the same way, but then there are also, you mentioned talent agencies. United Artists just moved to Boyle Heights, and they represent Murakami and Jeff Koons and celebrities and film celebrities. And I'm not saying that they can't work with a local context in a sensitive way, but I think that people assume with good reason that that kind of presence is a little bit more exploitative of just cheap real estate.
I think if you're poor white I mean, you also have a right to survive, and you know, going into neighborhood as long as you are like respectful, like it's just like your demeanor says a lot about you. So if you are nurturing and accepting and say hello, it, you know, like the guy who's been there forever is not going to hate on you for being there. I think that's kind of like, I think stratification also is like, it has like, it's, you know, it depends on the human.
Yeah, and some of this you can sort of answer from taking the more what is our collective responsibility versus the responsibility of an individual. Any one person has to like move and live where they can afford and try to be nice to their neighbors. I don't care like how much money they're worth. They should do that all the time. That sounds like the right
Yep.
way to just like be alive. Like, you know, move to the Upper West Side. You should probably be nice to your neighbors. Like, I don't know who they are, but be nice to them. But at the same time, when you thinking about corporations and that will have an immediate, much bigger impact on what a neighborhood does, that it's going to displace people and change rents and things like that, that's something that we can take collective responsibility for if we could actually organize in some way to do this, which is, you know, calling your representatives, trying to insist on rent regulation in different areas. And I mean, all this exists in New York. It's like part of the fabric that people are actually do actually participate in trying to like rent regulate and to keep neighborhoods diverse and to keep it both economically and racially and everything else. It doesn't work as effectively as we might want, but you know, that's something you can do as an individual. That's better than saying like I shouldn't move somewhere. You should move wherever you can and then vote the right way.
I'm just going to, I know there are a lot of questions, and I want to make sure we get to them. So Brooke?
Yeah, I was just going to say a couple of things. I think that the question of complicity, as you've kind of pointed out to a certain degree, and I think both on everyone's part, but certainly on Noah's part in terms of mentioning the question of community and community versus competition. And also in David's part, he slipped this in and he didn't mention what he was saying, but he started talking about Levinas, which is about an ethics of being face-to-face. Or, I mean, I could go into the phenomenology, but let's not. But what I would say is that, you know, what I find very interesting is about posing this question in New York. I think from a curatorial standpoint, I spend most of my life feeling like a secret agent. Like we were trying to take some kind of wealth or power from one place and redistribute it to somewhere else, right? Either through recognition or redistribution of funds or what it is, you know, taking those necessary evils. But I also find very interesting the relationship of having been in an art environment in other countries, and David knows what I'm talking about, which I think have not necessarily now, but historically had more of a community orientation. And I think it's an anthropological question. Like, and that's what I mean by posing this question in New York, in what you can consider cosmopolitan centers, has a different effect than, say, posing this question in, I don't know, let's say 1940s Taos, New Mexico, right? Where you have a nascent art community that was really built around a few surrealists moving there. You know, so I wonder how much there's an anthropology involved in it and how much that anthropology has to do with underlying values within a highly capitalized system like New York. And I don't know if there's a question there, but if there is, you can consider it.
I know we have a bunch more questions. I think this, okay.
Hi. I was hoping if you, Noah, if you could expand on this idea that you brought up earlier about mutual liberation, acknowledging that that many people have more privilege than others, and that we're not at this point in our existence of like being a post-racial or like post-human in that state of being. How do you reconcile those existing inequalities and this idea of making ourselves or thinking of ourselves as part of this larger collective of people?
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, please.
Well, I think that, I mean, mutual liberation is something I learned about from the Occupy movement, because for a while in the beginning of the movement, it was a very open space. It was a very, you know, it was actually a very diverse space like I'd never seen before in New York. It was like on the subway, in the level of a subway at rush hour in terms of socioeconomic difference, except that people were talking to each other. And since there's no possibility to make small talk among people of that kind of disparity, because small talk doesn't exist in that space, people were just planning actions. It was a really exciting thing. And so the actions we were planning was like mutual liberation, right? Like somehow it's about inequity, and somehow we're going to go and do a march right now or an action right now directly about it. It was very like galvanizing. And I wouldn't have been in the park to like help somebody or because I felt bad about somebody. I basically was there because I wanted to be there. Like I felt my own struggles with debt and with 2008 and my life after 2008 and stuff like that. So we're doing this project, my group Occupy Museums did this project to understand in a way who are the American artists. And it's just like, it's such a complex picture. Everyone holds multiple identities. There's this weird class slippage that's apparently part of being an artist, right? Where you're closer to billionaires than most people, and you're closer to being, you know, evicted from your apartment than many people. And I think that the mutual liberation has to do with kind of holding those different identities and letting them and acknowledging them. And in those identities, we use debt as a kind of connective tissue of which almost everybody holds some kind. There's a lot of overlap, you know. And so for me, one of the big danger is like narratives. When I got out of grad school, 2004, people didn't talk about debt openly. People didn't talk about class openly in the art world. It was like super cagey in the New York art world. It's like, keep your cards to yourself. Don't complain. Just like see what everyone else is up to, and tell people you just sold your show out or something, right? And now, one victory that we have made is that we're in a different art world now. These kind of conversations are commonplace, even if there are no answers. And I think that that's the key, deconstructing those kind of big, like false narratives about what the art world is. You come down to the economic realities and the differences. I mean, there's no class distinction. It's not black and white. It's super complex, right? In the US, and people have histories, and it's about all kinds of stuff. But being real about it, you find the key to how you need to be liberated from the bullshit. And I think that, and I think it really comes from your own need to be liberated, and then you join the struggle.
I want to also just mention that with respect to Occupy, it's also, I think, important, and in terms of you know, different demographics or different levels of privilege, it's important to remember that Occupy occurred, you know, the best part of a year after the so-called Arab uprisings. And in the context of everything that was being kind of put forward by, say, the Bush administration about exporting democracy, it was actually the other way around. That movement traveled from the Middle East to the US. I mean, obviously, these things are more complex. I'm not saying it was a one-directional thing, but there was a full, you know, the best part of a 12-month period. I just want to read one thing that speaks to that. The sociologist and art critic Timo Kabilinke observes how, quote, recent planetary civil movements, this is in the context of Occupy and the Arab uprising, recent planetary civil movements outline a political consciousness that has been a prior ideal for a great many artists, the feeling of being part of one world, adding that while this may have begun as an Enlightenment paradigm, which was later developed into a powerful tool for criticism by writers like Frantz Fanon and Homi Bhabha, now, for the 99%, the majority of people on the planet, the pressure of existence has pushed it into being. And this idea that artists who all wanted to be global citizens and be at one with each other, that the pressures of the political and economic pressures that came to a head at that period following the financial crisis and all the other things that were happening in the Middle East, it's almost like the utopia got pushed into existence. And I think that's really interesting, by necessity.
And also, it went from Wisconsin to the Arab, Wisconsin, right, which went for Trump. That's where the first uprising in a way happened. Then it went to the Arab Spring.
Right.
Then to Southern Europe, Spain and Greece, and then to New York. So it was a nice tour around the world, and then also to Hong Kong and everywhere else.
Yeah.
In between.
Did you talk to the Trump supporters about why?
Why they voted for Trump?
Yeah.
Because they wanted tax cuts.
No, but you talked to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's like what every conservative person you meet living in New York says. It's like, well, of course I'm super socially progressive, and like I have gay friends, you know? like they say shit like that, and they're like, but you know, I'm just fiscally conservative. It's people who are selfish. I mean, that is, I think, a very
Yeah. At the same time, I mean, I think
straightforward way of looking at it. Like people are just selfish.
the kind of final frontier of the question of mutual liberation is how do you make the 99% take in that last 1%? How do we get to the billionaires, especially the conservative ones, of which they're all basically conservative, to recognize that they need liberation and that they should like just step over the line?
That's kind of my question, because by unionizing and so on, you're basically shifting the whole system, and how are artists going to survive during that transition? Because everything going on in the country takes sacrifice at the end of the day, and you're saying a lot of artists are in debt, so how are you going to get over that hump? You know, unionizing is a great idea, but you know, it's a really tough hill to get over right there.
I mean, I think it's probably much more feasible to unionize, unionize certain segments of artists, practitioners, like performers, and like this was one of the models that Jordan Kelly tried to introduce to their performance at the Guggenheim. One of the great things about Wage was suggesting what is a livable or fair wage for writers and for performers. And I know for me, most of the major art magazines, not Frieze, but most of the major art magazines I wrote for did not pay that and do not pay that. And actually, with some of the smaller publications that were just getting started when Wage was publicizing this, that took it up and were able to support me early on. Although that's a sort of weak answer to your question.
No, but I'm saying when you have, you need a really large number of artists to really come together to make it work. Because if you have a certain section or group together, that's great. But then you're going to have some people, like you were saying, I can't remember who was saying it through the back door, who are going to say, well, you know, these rich people aren't going to accept, because you're in this group. So now they're going to go behind you and try to sell their work at X price. You see, and so therefore I think there's going to have to be a shift in the model and how artists are going to sell their work, especially in the beginning, to make the whole long-term picture work.
But I think your point also was that it needs to move way beyond, like the interpersonal relations between an artist and a collector and individual sales. It's structural, systemic change. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, but that's what he was talking about.
Takes time.
I mean,
It doesn't happen
I think
overnight.
basically that's exactly the brick wall, the wall that's in our face right now, because nobody can think their way around that question. I mean, it's like I said, it's not about, complicity, it's about structural dependency. It's like complicity is not the problem. I mean, the problem is exactly as you're putting it. If you were going to make a union, on what resources would that union be based that don't currently exist in the system? Show me somebody who makes a few $100,000 that isn't tied directly into Wall Street. There's no such thing, doesn't exist. There's no rich person who isn't part of that, who isn't making other rich people richer, because the economy doesn't work that way.
But there aren't even
Right?
banks.
There's
You
not
can't even
exactly.
divest. If you have over $120,000, I think, you can't even divest
You can't.
into a bank that is most unionized banks, right, like amalgamated banks, banks that are that aim to be outside of the system of the monolithic banks. I think there are 4 monoliths that own all the banks in America. Are not FDIC insured.
Right.
So you can be someone who has $600,000 in savings, and you can take that risk and put it into a small bank, but the fact of the matter is, you're probably taking a huge risk with your money. So there's even a problem, I mean, with divesting, right? You can't even divest your money. And people at the level, like you were saying, how do you bring the 1% over, is that there's not even mechanisms in place for people who are wealthy or on the upper levels of the wealth spectrum to come over. There's not even,
Right.
like, there's no financial structures that exist to allow that to happen.
So I think that, but I think you can't just say, okay, there's no.
No, we
there's
have
no
to
answer
come
to
up
it.
with something.
The answer is like, the answer is you like can test things out and you can experiment, because a lot of things is that we basically don't know what's possible because nobody pushes on things because everyone's scared because we're so deeply networked. So what Occupied Museums tried to do is like see what happens when you do this, you know? We're still in that experimental mode. Even like the other day at the Whitney, there was this big dinner with billionaires, and I was like, I stood up and started talking to them, like just because like nobody knows what you do in these situations when you start breaking that fourth wall that everyone's being part of right now. But like, I think that right now the answer is that to start it out, it would not be pretty. That's the answer. Like, it would be like
but there's
high
some
risk,
interesting things
poverty, all that
that
stuff.
are
but it's
happening.
a
And
group of
admittedly,
people
I'm not
that's-
sure how, but
Yeah.
maybe coming together, because I think not only the education of artists, but I think somehow you have to join these groups and protests and actually educate
Yeah.
the public, because your new market are not people with millions of dollars. They're now people with smaller,
There's,
Yeah.
there's some
disposable-
interesting
amounts of disposable
tools
income.
that could be repurposed. Like if you take something like the Artist Pension Trust, which
Oh, yeah.
is actually very effectively generating a kind of like, retirement accounts for artists.
But they've never actually paid out.
No.
It
I
hasn't
think they did
happened
one
yet.
payout.
Yeah, it's really early. But more importantly, it's like I don't care about retirement accounts exactly, but it does, the fact that they were actually able to get a lot of people to sign up and get interested means that it's actually creating a network that is organized and does have a kind of built-in regulation mechanism. Now, whatever their purpose is, or obviously like can dovetail with like Wall Street money, it can end up being very questionable. But there's a mechanism there that can actually help with the idea of organizing people. Like if you have a pool of resources that can then be deployed towards things, you then have collective power.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think the mechanism we have to organize is like, how many people here have Chase credit card bank? Like, how many people have a credit card in Chase? See, there you go, right there. That's a group. Like, we're already organized by giant financial institutions. If we just counter-organized, we could stand up and be banging down the doors of Chase tomorrow. I mean, but I think that Artist Pension Trust is the worst example, because that is capitalization and bundling. And who do they select to be in that group? And what happens if your career isn't doing well by the market, and you can get bumped out of those things? I mean, it's like the worst,
No,
filtering system.
I'm not trying to advocate
Yeah.
for them. I'm just saying that the structure of how it's created could be modified. That there's some tools there. Like if you could go and just like take
But this
their
gets
algorithm.
back to his question. See, it can be modified, but the problem with the Artist Pension Trust is, if you ever read Waleed Rod's
Yeah.
Reflux
Yeah.
thing, it's
Yeah,
great,
it's
right?
an amazing thing.
So the problem is it's the ultimate capitalist structure that's tied into, direct line into capitalists who are trying to make money off of it. So
And who knows? And then it's also problematic because then they partnered with Mutual Art, which was like
yeah, they
this
make
so-called.
these
Anyways,
partnerships which are.
I gotta
so you
move
have
us
to do it
along.
without capital, and that's the challenge he's talking about. How do you do it without capital? And that's the wall.
We're going to take our last question to a very patient
I
gentleman
have
in the
a
back.
comment. We're talking about structures. And if you look historically, of course, Occupy, you look at the Paris Commune, which lasted 3 months, but they created their own society with everybody, educationally, with the artists and everything else. There are the Zapatistas who have created a counter society. I think the answer is to look at the grassroots and possibly to create counter organizations. They can be small, but if they're widespread, they can coalesce into something else. And I think in a time like this of great oppression and everything else, there are spaces that people can get together in, and create institutions. I mean, sure, artists can organize co-ops, people can live, schools can be. I think the great failure of the left is that people on the left with their idealism, didn't start businesses of sorts in the community to support their values. I think this is very important. This has not really been done. People will do the action, they will participate in the system in the ways that do the least harm in health and education and such. But nobody has taken, or very, very few people have taken those steps to try to really create these counter institutions. There was an artist group 2 years ago. I used to get their newsletter. I'm not a painter or a sculptor. I'm a playwright and poet. But the Art Workers Coalition, they did a lot of activist work in the arts community. They put out a newspaper, toxic materials, all kinds of related issues. This goes back 20 or 25 years. But there are precedents for doing things in the artistic community. It's not just expressing it through your art that is the only way of doing it, but it's by interconnection. And there needs to be coalitions of people that are activists with Black Lives Matter and Latino and immigrant rights coalitions and such, and artists all together fighting for certain common goals. We need what we would call a popular front. We need a completely realignment of people, let's say, who are on the progressive left and the people who are on the right, you know, in grassroots coalitions that need to be built if you're going to challenge the capitalist system, which is at the root of all these structural problems. Real estate development drives this country in big and small cities. You can't get away from it anywhere. I mean, you can buy your little plot of land and live in a remote place, but eventually they'll catch up with you. They'll think, this is a beautiful spot. We need to buy up 10,000 acres here and build whatever. So you have to think in those ways. Another point I want to make, through my experience, you talk about a Trump collector, but I got a government grant during the Vietnam War, and not Vietnam, Iraq War. And I'm a playwright, an activist, and I was told by the government and the people, you should not speak out about political issues. Well, I did just the opposite. I talked to the press in India, where I was, about attacking both the American government and the complicity of the Indian government, too. And, you know, and I wrote a play which the American government said, do not give us any credit for helping you. So it was done through an Indian foundation in Mumbai at the Art Center. But, you know, people said, you shouldn't have accepted the grant under these circumstances. I said, I can bite the hand that feeds me and be just myself, you know? And if they don't like it, they can take away the grant and they can send me home. They didn't do that. I found out that in the newsletter, they said, I found some of the best actors in Mumbai to do a play about the psychological effects of terrorism, which it was not about. But they co-opted it with a nice picture. So the government and the corporations, as we know in ads, all the counterculture has been co-opted into ads. The corporations, the government, everybody will try to co-opt what you do. So I just think you need to think creatively, and you have to be able to continue to struggle in creative ways. Work within your art and be true to your art, but yet work with other people. And that's a few words that I wanted to add.
Thank you for sharing that. That's our last question, but I encourage all of you, if you have more questions, come find us in our everyday lives or something. No, you can go online. You can engage with us online, on the Instagram, on the YouTube channel. We're going to have a chapter meeting here soon. That's going to be a New York chapter that you're all welcome to come to. But before we go, we have a last-minute surprise we're going to wedge in here for our last 5 minutes, which is we're going to hear a couple words from Catherine Jones, who leads the Resistance Media Collective, a part of the Action Group Network. The RMC is a group of professional creatives dedicated to using their skills to amplify the voices of the resistance. Since November, the RMC has created video, live stream, animation, graphics, and social media strategy projects for Indivisible. If you guys don't know what Indivisible is, you really should. It's an amazing group around the country. The Women's March, the Sister Marches, the Tax March, the May Day Action, Citizens Action New York, Make the Road New York, and for small grassroots organizations working on immigration and voter fraud issues. We are very lucky to have you here tonight, Catherine. And she's just gonna, yeah.
You guys, thank you. So first of all, thank you for having me here. This is actually the second Hands Off Our Revolution event I've been to, and they're enlightening and they make me think in new ways. I come from the theater world. I was an actor for many, many years. So all of this is both new and enlightening and exciting to me, and thank you for having me be here. So I run the Resistance Media Collective. We were born on literally September 19th because, like many of you, September 8th was a shock. One of the worst nights of my life. I don't think I slept. My life changed that night. There's something called the Action Group Network, which was started by a theater and TV guy named Bo Willimon. I was invited to come meet him, and 400 famous people, as it turned out. Everybody in the room was famous. But as I walked down that street for the first time in Gowanus, and I saw all these people headed to this meeting, for the first time ever, there was some rage and some anger lifted from me. And although I went to that meeting with no expectations, I left leading this media group. And there's a couple of things that are significant about it. One is because I was an actor for so long, but I'm also a doer, I'm used to doing a lot with nothing. So, like truly. And then also for a long time, I had an arts and technology business, which if you try to combine theater and technology, God help you. I tried. So as a result, I've been running this group for a long time, and we are super, super productive. We are very, very action-oriented. And to date, we've been very service-oriented. So when a group calls us and tells us what they need, we get it done. So as a result, and we are a combination, I lead in kind of in the engine underneath the group, but it's the best group of human beings I've ever worked with in my life, both as artists, as people, and also as business people, which is really great for me. It's one of the reasons we're doing so well. Being so productive. So in that time, we've worked for we've made a video for the Electoral College movement. We've done an animation for the Women's March. I personally did a live stream that consolidated all the sister marches from all around the world into one 12-hour live stream. So that you could kind of bop from Barcelona to Oaxaca and just see that this was a global movement. We have worked with all those organizations. I won't repeat them. But one of the things that we've done that has been super effective and super hard is kind of based on the hackathon model. We have been having these creative hackathons. We did one for the Tax March. We did one for the May Day March. And in these creative hackathons, we pull together creatives and we find out what assets. I mean, we are super, super asset-oriented and product-oriented. We find out what assets these organizations need, and we make it happen for them, organizations with very little money. So very specifically, this week we have the biggest one we've ever had before. It is called the Universal Healthcare Action Blitz. We are partnered with a number of organizations, including Progressive Coders, which is all the apps you use, Progressive Coders made. Anything that you did for Bernie, Progressive Coders made. PNHP, Healthcare Now, Art Not War, all these organizations, we've come together, and this Saturday we will be spending a 9-hour day creating. There'll be coding. If you're a coder here, they are creating some coding projects. But also we are taking 6 healthcare stories. People are coming in with their stories, and we are creating 6 separate social impact campaigns that are specifically geared towards New York State universal health care, because universal health care is as close to it's ever been to passing in New York State. It is also being debated in 16 additional states, and it is our hope that if we can bring health care to the masses in 1 state and 2 states and 3 states and 4 states, we can bring it to everybody. And as artists, my God, I don't have health insurance, and I'm a middle-aged woman, so just throwing that out there. So we will be creating campaigns all weekend. We have a lot of people coming. The day is scheduled. There's fabulous food, like pizza, but it's going to be an amazing, amazing day. And I'm just going to tell you what we need. If any of you guys are out there, or if you know people, we would love to have you join us. We need more videographers. We need editors. We need artists. We need copywriters. And it's an amazing group of people. It's going to be an amazing day. So if you're interested, let me know. Or if you want to know more about RMC, we have so much work. My phone literally does not stop ringing because these groups need so much work. And we are trying to move to a paid model as well, which is hard, but we're working towards that. So that is me, and thank you for having me.
That's it. Thank you, guys. Thank you, ICP.
Thank you.
Thank you.